If you'd like to work along with me at home, open the Project Files folder, then open the Lesson 4 folder, and then open the workbook, Insert Rows and Cells. Before we talk about inserting rows and columns, let's take a quick look at how to just resize them. Nothing could be easier. Resize a column, put your mouse between two column names, right here between the A and B, and drag right or left. You can do the same thing with rows. Put your mouse between two rows. You got to get right on the crease between them. Your mouse pointer changes appearance, and then you just drag down or up. If you have text in a column that's wider than the column, you can automatically resize the column width by double-clicking on the join line between two columns. Here I've typed Muddy Run Whitewater Rafting in cell A2. To resize the column automatically to fit that, I'll double-click on the border between A and B. Now I'll undo all the things I've done here by clicking the drop-down arrow next to the Undo button and choosing the very first item at the bottom of the list. If you want to resize multiple columns at the same time, select the entire column for each column that you want to resize. Here I'm just going to hold my mouse down on the A and drag across to the B, C, and D. Then just hold your mouse down on the border between any of those columns and drag. All selected columns resize to exactly the same width. You can accomplish the same thing from the Cells group of the Home tab. If we click on Format, you'll see that you have a whole group of options here for working with cell size, including row height and column width. The three little dots after row height and column width indicate that you're going to get a dialog box. We'll go to column width, click the button, and see what we get. So the column width for the current column, C, can be changed by typing in a new width. I'm just going to type 30 in here and click OK. You can get to that same dialog box by right-clicking right on the column head and choosing column width. Of course, there are options here to do the same thing with row height. The default width also brings up a dialog box. This allows you to set the standard width for every column in your worksheet. Let me change this to a 30 and click OK. Now you can see that every column is resized exactly the same way. Control Home to get back to A1. This only affects the current worksheet. If I go to the Insert Cells worksheet, you'll see that nothing's been changed there as far as column width. So when you see the word default, don't be concerned that this is going to affect every worksheet in every workbook forever. It's just the current worksheet in the current workbook. Okay, and with that said, let's now take a look at how to insert rows and columns. Inserting rows, columns, and cells is such a common thing that Microsoft has given us a lot of different ways to do each of these things. And at the risk of overloading you with so many ways of doing things that you don't know which one to pick, I'm just going to suggest that you just find one that you like and then just stick with that. There's no reason to remember them all, but just for posterity's sake, I'll show you a bunch of them anyway. All right, so here we want to put in a new row. We're going to come down here to row 8. I'd like to put in new material here, maybe have a new employee that I want to put in above Betty Reese. To insert an entire row, I'm going to right-click on the 8 to the left of Betty. Right-click, and then just choose Insert. And as you can see, that inserts the row. To delete that row, I could just right-click on the 8 again and choose Delete. It doesn't get any easier than that. All right, so let's say I want to insert multiple rows. Maybe I have 3 new employees that I want to put in above Betty Reese. Well, in this case, I'm going to select the 8, the 9, and the 10, and then just right-click and choose Insert. That pushes Betty and everybody else down. We'll delete those rows by right-clicking on the selected rows and choosing Delete. And then just click someplace in the worksheet to turn off the selection. Let's go back to inserting a single row again. Once again, we'll pick on Betty here. We'll click right on the 8 there to the left of her name. And this time we'll use the ribbon. In the Home tab of the ribbon, in the Cells group, you'll see the Insert button. The Insert button has two parts, the face of the button and then this little drop-down arrow right here. Well, for right now, we're just going to click right on the face of the button. The button will take a look at whatever you have selected and decide what to insert at that moment. And since we have an entire row selected, when you click Insert, it inserts an entire row and pushes Betty and everything else in that row down. All right, now if we want to delete that row that we just put in, we'll just click on the Delete button because it's going to work on whatever we have selected. Let's try another way. Again, we want to insert an entire row here, but we're going to do it this time without first selecting the row. This time we're just going to click out here in the row someplace on a single cell. Now we'll use the right-click method, and when you right-click, you notice that the words insert and delete both have three little dots after them. Anytime you see three little dots like that in a menu, that means you're going to get a dialog box. So we'll click insert, and we get the dialog box, and we get to make a choice now. What do we want to do? Well, we want to insert an entire row. You click OK, and that pushes Betty and everything else in that row down. Let's try the opposite. Again, we'll just pick any cell at random here in this row, right-click, choose Delete, get the little dialog box, and now it wants to know, what do you want to delete? Well, I want to delete the entire row. Yeah, just like that. All right, so we could also have done that same thing up here in the ribbon. Since we don't have a whole row selected, the insert button will do something different from the last time. So we want to click the little drop down arrow here and choose Insert Sheet Rows. Or you can click the drop down arrow now and choose Delete Sheet Rows. And as if that weren't enough ways to do things, how about a keyboard shortcut? Let's go back over to Betty again. We're going to click right on the 8 to the left of her name, select the entire row, and we'll use the keyboard shortcut Control+. Control+ takes a look at whatever you have selected, and then it inserts something based on whatever you have selected. And since we had that entire row selected, when you hit insert, it said, yep, he wants to insert an entire row, and that's exactly what it did. It's basically the same as hitting this button right here. All right, so what's the keyboard shortcut for deleting that row? Well, if Control+ puts one in, Control- would probably be the one to take one out. So let's try that. Control-. And sure enough, whatever you have selected at that time, it'll just delete that. Now, so far, we've been inserting and deleting rows. And you notice that when you do this, that the row goes the whole way across the worksheet. Clear out to column XFD. That's 16,384 columns to the right. And you know what? As long as there's nothing out there in those columns, that's not a problem at all. But in the next exercise, we're going to see that this actually creates somewhat of a problem. Let's go to the Insert Cells worksheet. Here we have not only the Western Division, but we have Eastern Division sitting right next door to it. And cutting a hole through the Eastern Division is not something that we want to do when all we want to do is add a new employee above Betty Reese. But just the same, let's take a look at how it'll work. If we right-click on the 8 next to Betty and choose Insert, it just cuts a hole the whole way across the worksheet and pushes everything down in the Eastern Division. Now at this point, we'd have to figure out some way to solve this problem by pulling all this data back up into the hole that we created, but it would just actually be easier to not do this in the first place. So let's undo that, and we'll take a look at another way of doing things. Since all I want to do is push Betty and these 3 cells down, why don't I just select Betty and these 3 cells? And I'll tell Excel, push everything down from this point. Basically, I want to take all this stuff right here and just move it all down one row, just like moving something from a top shelf to a lower shelf. So we start by selecting where we want that insertion to go. Select those 4 cells, right-click, and choose Insert. Now remember, the right-click insert is going to give us those 3 little dots, meaning a dialog box, and now we're asked the question, what do you want to do? And what it means is, what do you want to do with this clump of cells from Betty Reese down? I want to push them all down, and that's the default setting here, shift cells down. So watch Betty and her buddies. See how they go from the top shelf to a lower shelf, just like that. All right, that's one way to do it. How do we delete those cells? Again, we're only working with cells, not rows. So we right-click on those selected 4 cells and we choose Delete. 3 little dots, dialog box coming up. There it is. What do you want to do? Shift the cells up. That means Betty and Brett and Jazz and the totals row, they're all going to come from a lower shelf to a higher shelf. And we'll say OK, and they just like that. No problem at all. All of that without having any effect whatsoever on these guys over here. Now you can also do that from the ribbon. If we select Betty and her 4 numbers, we could go to the ribbon and just click on the Insert button right on the face of the button. And see, since we have those 4 cells selected, it knew exactly what to do. It just inserts those cells and doesn't ask any questions. Control-Z to undo that. If you want to see the little Insert dialog box just to be sure what you're doing, you can click the drop-down arrow to the right of Insert and choose Insert Cells to see the 3 little dots there. That means you're going to get the Insert dialog box and choose Shift Cells down. I'm just going to cancel out of there this time. How about the keyboard shortcut? Well, Control plus, that's going to bring up that same dialog box. And we'll go ahead and do it this time. Shift cells down. Click OK. And what if I want to get rid of these cells right here? Again, I'll go to the Delete button. Click the Delete button. It just goes ahead and deletes the cells. Let me undo that. You could click the drop-down arrow button. You could choose Delete Cells, 3 little dots, going to get the dialog box. What do you want to do? Shift the cells up. Yep. And the keyboard shortcut Control minus would also do the same thing as what we just did here with Delete Cells. Now we've been talking about inserting rows and cells. Everything we've just seen right now works the same way if you want to insert a column. If you want to insert a new column right here and take all of this stuff and just push it to the right, you just right-click on the B and choose Insert. And at this point, everything else we've seen applies. You can use the Insert button to insert columns, the Delete button to delete columns. You've got the whole right-click thing going on here. If you need to insert cells, you select the cells, right-click. You get the 3 little dots after the insert. I'm sure you can figure it out from here without me beating it all black and blue. So there you have it, a virtual cornucopia of methods of inserting and deleting rows and columns and cells.